أهلا بيكم. This lecture we're going to talk about the eyeball, the globe. So let's start. The eyeball actually is an extension from the brain and connected to the brain by the optic nerve. And the proof to that is watching the embryology and the fact that the layers of the eye, the coats of the eye, are a continuation of the coverings of the brain. Globe shaped from the inside, from anterior to posterior, we have the cornea, then the anterior chamber between the cornea and the iris, and this is the iris, which is the eye color and has the pupil in the center. Then going more posterior will be in the posterior chamber. See these two connected cavities. Between the lens and the iris is the posterior chamber, then the lens, then comes the vitreous chamber, or called the postremar chamber, that's filled with viscous humor, and then to the back where the optic disc, where the optic nerve exits the eye. Now the anterior chamber between the cornea and the iris, and it's filled up by the aqueous humor that produced in the posterior chamber by the ciliary processes, and fills the posterior chamber and then fills the anterior chamber through the pupil, and it will be drained by a venous system here called the canal of Schlemm, or venous sinus, scleral venous sinus, at the angle between the cornea and the iris. So the production in the posterior chamber and the drainage in the anterior chamber. And now anything affecting the drainage, reducing the drainage, or anything increasing the production, like a tumor, for example, this will result in increased pressure inside the anterior chamber, and this is called the pressure, the eye pressure. And the increase in pressure is a case called glaucoma. So the glaucoma is the increased pressure inside the aqueous humor in the anterior and posterior chambers. It has nothing to do with the vitreous chamber here. Okay, sometimes, by the way, the obstruction is intermittent. Like you get a case where someone tells you that I went to the movies and came out with a glaucoma. Yes, because during the movies, the dark environment, there was dilation of the pupil. And when the pupil gets dilated, the dilator pupillae muscle contracts and wrinkles here at this angle if there's something wrong with its development. So wrinkles here and closes this drainage area. So the patient comes out with an increase of pressure in the anterior chamber. This is called glaucoma. Okay. The lens is hanging in the middle, suspended in the ligament, in the middle by the suspensory ligament. See, suspensory ligament is zonular fibers produced by the papillae of the ciliary body. And it's biconvex lens with more convexity to the back, facing the vitreous humor, and it's the one that refracts eye to the fovea here on the back in the retinal layer. The opacity of the lens is called cataract, and this is because of denaturation of the proteins forming the lens with age. Okay, with age. This is called cataract. Now, when we study the globe, we have to study the coats or walls of the eyeball. The outer coat, the fibrous coat is an extension of the dura actually, and posteriorly it is the sclera until the corneoscleral junction where the cornea starts. This is the cornea. Okay, cornea and sclera are of the same fibrous coat layer. And the middle vascular layer, the one you see here is the dark one, is the choroid. It's full of blood vessels and pigments, and forms anteriorly the ciliary body, which is a ciliary muscle all around the lens, and processes that produce the aqueous humor and the zonular fibers that hang the lens in the middle. So this is the second coat. The third coat is the retina, of course, and we will study it soon after a few slides. The vessels, of course, the vessel of the eye is the ophthalmic artery. We discussed this before, that it originates from the internal carotid, and inside the orbit it crosses superior to the optic nerve from lateral to medial to continue its supplies to the ethmoid air cells and the dorsum of the nose, right? Now, I told you about short ciliary and long ciliary arteries. This is one of the long ciliary arteries called the posterior ciliary. Ciliary because it pierces the sclera, the eyeball, and goes inside and anastomose with each other in the choroid layer, and supply mainly the fibrous and the vascular layer. While remember, the supply for the retina came from the central artery of the retina, from the ophthalmic artery that pierced the optic nerve and went with it to the inside and branched, and we will see an ophthalmoscope picture of that. Okay, there are a series of arteries called the anterior ciliary arteries, which are branches from the muscular branches of the ophthalmic artery. So the eye has a rich blood supply, actually. Okay, the venous drainage from each posterior quadrant of the eye, 4 veins called varicose veins, they come out draining the eye and eventually drain into the superior ophthalmic vein and then to the cavernous sinus, of course. Okay, the fibrous layer, we said it forms 5/6 posteriorly by the sclera and 1/6 anteriorly by the cornea. The sclera provides attachment to the surrounding muscles and as well as attachment to the fibrous sheath that encloses the eye, attached around the optic nerve, and in front stops at the corneoscleral junction, right? The inner layer, which is the middle layer, the choroid layer, it's full of blood vessels and pigments. It's full of pigments. See, anterior, it forms a ciliary muscle. Now, this ciliary muscle is a cut section, is triangular in shape, but actually it's a ring of muscle that surrounds the lens. Muscle fibers in different directions, circular, longitudinal, oblique. What happens is when the muscle contracts, the ring inside the ring of muscle diminishes in size, decreases in size, because the ring is closing, like the shutter mechanism of the camera. You know what I mean? When it contracts, the ring inside, the space between the muscle is reduced. Okay, so opposite of what you think about contracting this muscle, so it pulls on the zonular fibers, what happens is exactly the opposite. When the ciliary muscle contracts, it reduces the ring size between the muscles, so the suspensory ligament will be relaxed actually, and the lens will increase its size and convexity. Okay, this is the continuation of the vascular layer of the eyeball, and of course the iris, which is the color of the eye, is a continuation of the vascular layer. The iris contains, by the way, at the edge, contains the constrictor papillae, while along its length contains the dilator papillae. Okay. The ciliary body, it's formed of the muscle, the processes, and the processes produce what's so called the zonular fibers that actually attach to the circumference of the lens. And also the processes produce aqueous humor that fills the posterior and anterior chambers. Okay, so we've talked about the lens and the iris. The inner layer of the eyeball is the retina, and posteriorly the retina is classified into two layers: a non-visual retina that is continuation of the pigment layer of the retina, and lines the ciliary body, the ciliary muscle, and its processes. This is called the non-visual retina, and the layer that's actually has the neuronal component of the retina, which are the receptors and the connecting neurons, in the form of layers, around 9 layers. Okay, the retina has a pigment layer at the outside, which is adherent to the choroid. Excuse me, and a neural layer, or the optic layer, which is only attached around the site of exit of the optic nerve, and what's so called the ora serrata. See, this is the ora serrata, which marks the end of the optic retina and the start of the non-visual retina, the one that lines the ciliary body, the ora serrata. So this is a site of attachment. Another site of attachment of the neural layer is the where the optic disc is, while the pigment layer of the retina is firmly attached to the choroid. And actually, the line of separation in retinal detachment is between the neuronal and the pigment layer, not the whole thing. The pigment layer remains adherent to the choroid. Okay, as you can see here, this is an ophthalmoscope, or what's called fundoscopy, for the fundus of the eye. See the branches of the central artery and the veins of the retina. Here you can see the different layers of the retina, and this is the layer of rods and cones. Now, I want to draw your attention to something. See, the receptor layer is posterior as you are going out. So the light must traverse the full thickness of the retina till it hits the rods and cones, and then the electric response goes back through these layers to the surface, where the fibers converge to form the optic nerve that goes out again. See, this is the pathway you'll study in physiology, the relation between the stimulus and the response. The light comes this way to hit the receptors, and the receptors fire back their electric impulses backwards till the surface, which is the inside, and then they go out again as the fibers of the optic nerve. Okay, the most sensitive area of the retina is the macula lutea, and the macula lutea, see, the thickness of the retina is decreasing until it's thinnest in the very center. It's called the fovea centralis, where there are no more rods, the photoreceptors for dark. There are more concentration of cones. Cones will give you colored acute vision. Okay, this is the fovea centralis. See, in this fundoscopy, this is the optic disc, the site at which the optic nerve leaves the eye, and this patch here, dark patch here, is the macula lutea. So what do you think this eye is, a left or a right eye? Remember, the optic disc is the medial one. So this is medial, this is lateral, this should be the left eye. Okay? fundoscopy of the left eye. Optic disc is medial and the fovea is lateral. This is the macula lutea with a central fovea. Okay, that will be all about the globe, and I think this concludes the orbit and eye. We will be starting with the ear. Thank you very much for watching.